Hello, welcome to World Civilizations up to 1500. Now, this is the third session of the sixth topic titled Mesoamerica, Olmec, Teotihuacan, and the Maya. Now, in this session, we're going to continue looking at part two, the classic era of Mesoamerica. This time, we're shifting our focus to the Yucatan Peninsula and parts of Central America, the Maya region. We're going to cover that very thoroughly. And at the end, part three is going to look at the collapse of the classic civilizations. And we're going to assess the reasons why the collapse occurred, why the cities were abandoned, and the period that followed after that, which is called the post-classic period. All right, so let's go to our slide. All right, so we're looking now at the Maya. We already looked at Teotihuacan in the Central Valley of Mexico in session 2. We covered that quite extensively. Now, there's going to be another classic civilization flourishing in Middle America or Mesoamerica. They'll be called the Maya later on. We're looking at after the conquest. The Spaniards and other travelers that were inquiring about how the peoples that inhabited this region called themselves. Again, the term Maya came about. Again, we're not really sure how the peoples that created the civilizations called themselves, but as a whole, they really shared identical characteristics everywhere. So they shared a similar culture. They share a similar worldview, religious traditions, a writing system, a mathematical system, the same calendars, for example, the same architectural ideas, although there were different expressions, of course, in different areas. But like we look at, for example, the ceremonial city, the pyramids, for example, and the like. Identical again in the entire Maya region. They varied from time to time. They were changing styles according to different cycles of time, of course, but even those changes in styles in architecture occurred simultaneously in different areas of the Maya world. And the Maya world constituted a vast region that included, for example, parts of Mexico, which is the present-day state of Tabasco, Campeche, Yucatan, Quintana Roo, Chiapas as well, including parts of Central America, the country of Belize, Guatemala, and parts of Honduras, and parts of El Salvador as well, just parts of that. So it's a vast region. All right, so you can see that again in this map, that all of that constituted a single expression, so to speak, that will be called the Maya. So the cradle of Maya civilization, the starting point, in other words, of the early Maya communities and settlements, according to the archaeological record, those go back to about 2000 BC in a region that today is called El Petén, or the Petén jungle. Again, that includes parts of the northern region of Guatemala, and also the southern part of the state of Campeche. And again, it also included certain sections of the country of Belize as well. It is a jungle. It's called El Petén. And it is here that, according to archaeologists, we see the early presence of Maya farming communities. Those were, again, people actually developing the very first farms, growing corn, beans, and squash. And it is a very, very difficult environment, to be actually building an agricultural civilization. Now, during this time, we're still not looking at cities and urban centers. Those were just farming communities. Again, this is the early start of the Maya. And this is where Maya civilization is going to flourish first. And out of this region, we're going to see that civilization spreading in all directions, again, including the Yucatan Peninsula and south into Guatemala and beyond again. So this is the starting point, and this is a kind of formative period of agriculture for the ancient Maya that spanned between 2000 all the way to 600 BC. Okay, so again, for over 1500 years, they are indeed trying to transform the landscape, trying to transform nature, and trying to give way to an agricultural civilization slowly but surely. Now, as I said, the environmental background is going to be very difficult to be building an agricultural society in this region, because usually tropical jungles are not very favorable for this kind of agricultural development to take place. Again, it takes a lot of intensive labor. Humans must really work very intensively to transform nature. You have to, of course, make room for farms. You have to cut down trees, for example, and it takes a lot of course, effort in doing that. Kind of engaging what is called deforestation, gradual deforestation, for example. Also, this region lacks rivers. You know, there's really not a presence of major rivers. For example, in the Olmec region, there was, of course, a major river there, the Coatzacoalcos River, but here we don't see that. So this is a very difficult environment. Although it has, of course, a tropical climate, it has seasonal rains, for example, with the only exception of the month of August, which is really a month of drought. It doesn't really rain in that month. So it's still quite difficult, because the month of August is critical in the growth of corn. It is almost in the last phase of its growth and development. So again, this is a very, very difficult environment. Now, the ways the Mayas were dealing with the environment, particularly with the issue of soil depletion, it is very easy. Once you engage in intensive agriculture or farming, it is very easy to deplete the soil from all nutrients and all minerals. Remember, there are no herd animals here. There's no cattle to be used for fertilization. There's the lack of those animal species in the Americas, period. So the alternative solution to the depletion of the nutrients of the soil was to practice a technique that the Mayas developed over time, a technique that it has been used by not only the Maya, but literally by many Native American groups in the American continent. And that practice is called slash and burn. Again, the idea is that the vegetation contains all the nutrients, the minerals that is required to grow crops. You know, the fertilizer, that is to say, is contained in the leaves of the trees and the shrubs, and the vegetation, etc. So the Mayas figured out one way to transfer the nutrients from the leaves onto the soil. And the way to do that is by slashing the vegetation, letting it dry for a few weeks or a few months, and then burning it. And by burning the vegetation, they will be able to transfer the minerals onto the ground, like nitrogen, for example, phosphorus, and other minerals that are necessary for agriculture. Okay, so this is going to be the main methodology that the Mayas use to replenish the lost nutrients. They will farm in an area for 3 or 5 years at most, and then they will let it rest and then move into another area. And the idea is for that the area that was used for farming to rest and allow vegetation to grow once again. And in about 20 years, they will return back to the original point. So they will be moving every 3 or 5 years to new locations, and then they will return to the original location and perform the same procedure, this slash and burn. Okay, so it was a very challenging setting, again, to be developing a civilization, but the Mayas managed, you know, to work with nature and to mold it in a way that, as we'll see, they will be able to build a civilization. Of course, there's going to be a downside to that, because as long as the communities were small, there was no real threat to the environment, so to speak, because there was plenty of vegetation, the jungle was extensive. So as long as communities remain contained to a bare minimum, there'll be no problem. But as we'll see over the centuries, as those communities began to grow and they created kingdoms and city-states and the population exploded, there was the need to continue engaging in deforestation in a more intensive way. And this is going to have serious consequences, as we'll see at the end of this session. Of course, there's only a certain limit that nature can allow, if you will, humans to intervene, if you will, in the ecosystem and destroy it, for example, in order to gain or mine resources before they upset the balance in nature, for example. And we're going to get to see, of course, that at the end of this session. All right. So around 600 BC, according to the archaeological record, we start looking at the emergence of the very first independent city-states in the Petén, again, in this region that we just pointed out. And according to archaeologists, the very first urban center or ceremonial center, because all of the cities that the Mayas built, as well as the other civilizations in Mesoamerica, were ceremonial centers. So the very first ceremonial center that we see on the rise is called today El Mirador. Once again, we don't know how the inhabitants of this region call it. But this is the name that archaeologists have given to this site. It's called El Mirador. And it's called El Mirador because it has a very tall pyramid that you can look at the entire area of the Petén all over in every direction. Okay? So it's like a big tower where you can actually watch over the entire region again. So that's what El Mirador is, like the lookout, if you will. Like a tower in which you can actually look at the entire landscape, okay, the entire jungle. And according to the archaeological record, it was built around 600 BC, and this process of pyramid building and ceremonial centers arising in this region is going to continue for another 5 centuries or so in that region. So this is the very start of Maya civilization. This is the early start of Maya civilization. Some archaeologists call this the early classic period. Early classic. It's not yet the classic period, but it's really creating the conditions for the classic age of the Maya. Okay. This is just an animated representation of that city, El Mirador. This is how, during that time, it actually looked like in the heyday, if you will, of this of the site. It was full of temples and square plazas, for example, all of which were used for worshiping the gods. There were rituals performed there. The peasantry lived outside. This is very common. The vast majority of the population lived in the outskirts of the core city, and only the administrators, the rulers, live here. Okay, they're collecting tribute, they're collecting taxes, they're managing the economy in various ways, but most importantly, they're carrying out all the public rituals, again, devoted to the gods of agriculture. We're going to be talking about that once we get to the section on religion. As a whole, during this time, during this so-called early classic period, we see about 50 city-states arising in the Petén, in this region. About 50 of them, okay? Now, they were independent of each other. That's true, but at the same time, there was plenty of links and connections with each other as well. Even though they were self-governed and they were totally independent of one another, they were all connected through a system of white roads. In the Maya language, this is called the Sacbe. The Sacbe is just a white road. And there was a series of white roads, major highways, that connected every site with each other. It was a huge network, in other words. Okay, so what that means is that there was, of course, plenty of communication and trade taking place between them. Okay, and this is how people from the different localities were able to share ideas about farming, ideas about temple construction, ideas about religion, for example, the iconography and the like, language as well. So again, this really constituted a single culture given different expressions in different localities, but we see a similar pattern of architecture, language, for example, religion, agriculture, and the like again. So we'll be looking at the Sacbe once we look into the classic era as well. The Sacbe is extremely significant for the development of Maya civilization, the so-called white roads, those kinds of highways. We'll look at that more closely in just a few moments. Now, at some point, the Maya region is going to explode, so to speak, in terms of massive construction work, and we're going to see the rise of numerous city-states and kingdoms outside of the Petén. Again, from the Petén, we're going to see that culture, that civilization is going to disseminate and diffuse into the north, for example, the Yucatan Peninsula, parts of Chiapas as well, south into Guatemala, to the east in the country of what today is Belize, and so on. Again, it's going to be a very pervasive process of taking that culture, taking that civilization into different regions, and really creating different expressions of that civilizations in different areas, if you will. They're all part of this single Maya civilization. But again, they're going to be different, self-governed, independent political states emerging all over this region. And this is known as the classic era of Maya civilization, which gave rise to a series of different political states and kingdoms scattered across this region from, let's say, 250 all the way to 900 AD. This is considered, according to archaeologists, the classic age, the golden age, okay, the golden age of Maya civilization. This is going to be the peak, if you will, not only of the Maya, but really the peak of the highly advanced civilizations in the American continent, period. Again, the Mayas are going to be really considered like, for example, the Greeks of Europe, for example. This is going to be a land of mathematicians, astronomers, for example, scientists, creating systems of knowledge, as we'll see, like writing systems, calendars. There were people actually charting the cycles of time, etc. It was really a highly specialized, very scientific and intellectual civilization in that regard. Okay, so let's look at the emergence of those political states, those kingdoms that, according to archaeologists, in the past, we're talking about maybe during the 1950s and 1960s, the archaeologists have found up to that time about 20, maybe 25 of those kingdoms. But today, with more excavations, with laser technology, there are specific, of course, technologies used in which people fly an airplane over an area, and they're able, through laser scan actually look at the buildings that are below the jungle, something that cannot be detected by the naked eye, for example. They can see entire cities. So now we're looking at over 50, perhaps over 60 different city-states scattered across the entire region. Every city housed anywhere between 80,000 to 120,000 inhabitants. Okay, so we're looking at millions of people during the classic age of Maya civilization. It is estimated now that as a whole in the entire region there were about 10 million peoples living at some point, again, during the classic age of Maya civilization. Okay, so it's a very, very extensive region, a massive undertaking of creating cities with massive ceremonial centers, and they were populated by tens of thousands of people, each one of them. Okay. All right, so let's look at the political organization of those city-states or kingdoms. It is more appropriate to call them kingdoms because they were, as we'll see, ruled by kings. Okay, so in that regard, they were indeed kingdoms. So let's look at the political organization of those Maya kingdoms. So first and foremost, the political system that governed those kingdoms is called theocracy. Okay, so there were theocratic systems of government. So what is a theocracy? Once again, a theocracy is any government run by priests, okay, or religious figures. Okay, so it is a religious state, in other words. Now, the people that are conducting the ceremonies, the religion, the leaders, in other words, they are at the same time the rulers. So there's really no separation between religion and the state. They're one and the same. So this is a theocratic form of government, very similar to what we saw, for example, in Egypt, with the pharaohs, for example. Those were theocratic states. Okay, the priests were the administrators; they were running the state, and the supreme priest, the pharaoh, was the king, for example. Something similar. Now here, the rulers were all shamans. Okay, shamans. Remember shamanism. Shamanism had been central in the development of Native American culture and society, really going back to the archaic period that we looked at in the first session. Shamanism. We looked at the Olmec area, how the shamans became rulers, for example. Okay, they're now the rulers of society, the shamans, and they're conducting public rituals, and they're buried inside of the earthen mounds and so on, and they're worshipped even after death and so on. Again, so the shamans here, likewise, are going to, in the Maya area, they're going to also arise to the very top of society, and they're going to become the rulers of society. They're running the state. Okay? They're running the kingdom from top to bottom in every level. Okay. Now, during the Classic Age, we see something new arising in the Maya area, and that is that the rulers are not just going to be shamans with proclaim magical skills and powers to command the spirits of nature, but rather that here we see the emergence of a new institution. And this institution is called divine kingship. Okay, divine kingship. That is that we see the emergence of kings that claim a sacred lineage going back to the beginning of creation. Mainly, they claim that their family, their line, in other words, of descendants, go back to the first gods that started the institution of divine kingship. And in Maya mythology, all over the Maya region, it is believed that the forerunners of this institution of divine kingship were a set of individuals that came from the divine, from the heavens. They're called the hero twins. And they're nothing other than the sun and the planet Venus, the brightest stars, again, of the solar system. The sun and Venus are considered the brightest stars, and they're worshipped by the Maya. And those stars were associated with kingship, again, according to the Maya. And they have a lot of mythologies about once upon a time, the sun and Venus came to earth, they became human, and they challenged the lords of the night again. So they endured a series of trials and tribulations and ordeals. And after challenging the lords of the night, the lords of darkness, they were able to defeat them, and again, and at the end of the story, those hero twins save the world. They save humanity from darkness, in other words. So that's the sun and that's the planet Venus. So they're really associated, those two celestial bodies, with light. They're associated with bringing knowledge, for example, saving the world from darkness and destruction. And again, the kings are going to present themselves in that light as well, that they are the descendants of the sun and the planet Venus, and as such, that they're bringing, likewise, illumination, they're bringing light, they're bringing crops to the world, they're bringing wisdom, they're bringing knowledge as well. Okay, so this is very important, again, that we see the emergence of this institution in the Maya area, and throughout the classic period, there was no doubt among the Maya that the kings were actually gods. Those were actually god kings, in other words. Okay. Now, the social structure, how Maya society was structured and organized, it was also hierarchical, like a pyramid. Something we have seen in the Olmec, for example, area, and Teotihuacan in the Central Valley of Mexico. The Mayas were no exception, and this is really almost a universal organization in the ancient world, almost everywhere. That there are social hierarchies, and at the very top, we find kings, or we find religious figures, or a combination of both, for example. It is a common pattern almost everywhere, Again, so here in the Maya area, we see, of course, the king is a divine being. He's considered a god, so he's a god king. Just below the king, we see a priestly class of administrators. Again, so the administrators of the kingdom that are administering the taxes, for example, collecting tribute, handling agricultural works, commanding the labor of the peasantry, and so on. All of those functions are carried out by the priests. Okay, so this is a theocracy once again. Now, below the priest, this priestly caste of administrators, we see, of course, members of the nobility, and those are the local clan leaders. The king is ruling the kingdom, and the kingdom consists also of very powerful families as well, that also claim connections to divine beings and divine ancestors. So there are very powerful clans, once again, within the kingdom. And the king himself is coming from one of those clans anyways. Again, so whenever a king will die, in many cases, there was a certain process to choose the heir of the king. If the king had an offspring, of course, that would be the obvious choice for succeeding the throne. But when the king did not have any offspring, in many cases the local clan leaders will have to come in, the nobles in other words, and actually compete for power and try to claim the throne by presenting themselves as the oldest clan of the kingdom. That, well, my clan really goes back in time. We're the forerunners of the city, we're the forerunners of the realm, and we descend from a lineage of ancestors that everybody remembers, and so on. Again, and this is how the god kings were created. So once they were installed in power, they will have to advertise their divine and sacred lineage in various forms. We're going to get there, how the propaganda was used, in order to advertise the sacredness, the divinity of the king in this case. So below the nobility, we got, of course, artisans. Artisans throughout Mesoamerica occupied a very important place in the hierarchy because they are very, very needed and very important. They are the engineers, the builders of the temples and the cities. They're creating the artwork, the religious craft, and so on. So this is a society of artists. Again, there's no doubt about that. So artists do enjoy significant respect, honorability, privileges in the community. Below them are the merchants. And below the merchants, of course, the vast majority of the population consist of peasants. This is a peasant civilization. Okay, it is an agricultural civilization in which the vast majority of the masses, again, are peasants. So again, below the pyramid are the peasants, and the peasants are sustaining the entire pyramid through the production of agricultural products. So the economies are all agricultural as well. What people are taxing here are agricultural products. The wealth being generated, for the most part, comes from the land, from agriculture, in order to sustain the monarchy, the nobility, in order to sustain the upper classes. The peasants must grow the food for them. And even when they raise armies, the armies must also be sustained as well through the production of crops as well. Okay. It is also understood in archaeology that among the Maya there were also a subset of slaves as well. Okay, so below the peasantry we're going to see, of course, slaves. Slavery existed in the Maya area. Okay, so it's very important. So again, this is the pyramid, how the pyramid looked like during this time. Again, the king or the high priest, remember that the king is not just a political figure, he is the supreme shaman priest as well. He's summoning the forces of nature on behalf of the population. He's carrying out public rituals on behalf of the peasantry, on behalf of the entire society. He's mediating between the community and the world of the spirits and the gods and the ancestors as well. Again, below is the council, the priesthood. Very often, those were connected to the royal family, the administrators, a great many of them. Then the nobles, merchants and artisans, and then at the very bottom, the commoners, again, farmers and slaves. All right. Okay, so now, during the classic age of Maya civilization, the cities that the Mayas built were all ceremonial centers. Okay, so people did not, once again, live inside of the cities. You know, the same is true for Teotihuacan and the Olmec area as well. The masses, the vast majority of the population lives outside. Okay, because the cities were considered to be the abodes of the gods. There were temple pyramids. People built there in order to honor the gods of the kingdom, the gods of agriculture, the gods of nature, and those were the abodes, the homes of those gods, the pyramids themselves. Okay, so this is where people are carrying out rituals, pilgrimages, processions, ceremonies of all kinds year long. Almost daily, there is a ceremony taking place inside of the city. Of course, there are specific periods of time during the year that were more, let's say, special to carry out public rituals, particularly at the beginning of the planting cycle, for example, and at the end of the agricultural cycle, which is harvest. Those were major climatic points during the year when there's going to be a major assembly of people in the ceremonial centers to honor the gods of agriculture. It is true. But year long, ceremonies were taking place. Again, day after day, for various different gods and spirits, whether it's for healing, for medicine, for rain, for example, for the ancestors and the like. Again, there are many kinds of ceremonies being performed here. The priests live inside of the city. The royal family lives inside of the city as well. They have their residences in there as well. Okay, and also this is a place where the priests are also learning all of the symbols, the ideas, the knowledge that is necessary for them to carry out their functions as priests and administrators as well. So the centers of learning, or the so-called universities, were also located in the ceremonial center as well. Okay, in the ceremonial center. This is, again, where people are receiving the education, particularly the nobility and also the priesthood. Okay, they're being educated here as well. Now, despite the fact that throughout this region, which is a very extensive region, that included, many countries of Central America and Mexico, they were all connected with one another. Okay, they were all connected through this system of white roads that we mentioned originally, that flourished in the Petén, during the early classic period, that connected the different ceremonial centers of the Petén jungle, for example. This same process is going to continue expanding across the Maya world. And this is going to be one of the main reasons why Maya civilization is emerging as a single unit. Okay? That no matter how far apart the kingdoms were from each other, that they really shared identical ideas related to astronomy, to calendars, to time, to religion, for example, agricultural practices. Again, they are part of the single civilization. And the reason for that is because they were all connected through a system of roads, the so-called sacbe, again, or the white roads. That's what sacbe means. Sacbe means white roads. And they're all connected, every site with one another. That allowed for, of course, interregional trade. Again, they're all connected with each other, so that allowed, once again, commercial exchange, trade to take place between those cities, but also that allowed for interregional warfare as well. One of the reasons why those kingdoms went to war is because they were trying to dominate a region, create an empire, trying to dominate the other kingdoms and build an imperial system. And so for that, warfare was carried out along the white roads, there's the Sacbe. However, despite the fact that there's a series of wars taking place between the Maya kingdoms, none of those kingdoms succeeded in actually creating an empire. So there was never a Mayan empire, again, during the classic age of Maya civilization. Never. There was interregional warfare between the kingdoms, but there was never really a single unified imperial system in which one kingdom emerged triumphant, let us just say, by conquering all the others, unifying them, the way that happened, for example, in Mesopotamia, the way it happened in China, for example, the way it happened in Egypt. That never happened. Okay, that never happened among the Maya. Okay, again, this is a photograph today. This is, of course, a contemporary, of course, depiction of what remains of the Sacbe. They built highways. They literally built highways, again, across hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of miles of territory. So those were very extensive territorial domains that consisted of a city core. Again, the city core was composed of the main pyramid temples, the shrines, for example, where the royal family dwelled, the administrators and so on. They lived there and they also studied there. as well. But in the surrounding area of every Mayan kingdom, there were also additional minor temples that were built. It is estimated that outside of the city core, we find about 3,000 different structures surrounding it in a vast area that constituted about maybe 5 to 10 miles wide in perimeter. Again, so it was just an area filled with religious shrines and temples, and at the very center, the pyramid, the main pyramid. So initially, the Sakbe, or the white roads, intended to connect the main shrines, temples, and settlements with one another in order to carry out religious processions. Also, those serve to unify the kingdom together. Again, so if you are ruling from the city capital, so to speak, from the core city, if you're the king, you want to make sure that all the farmers and all the settlers, if you will, of your kingdom, your subjects, are connected to you. You know, you want them to pay tribute. You want them to also come to the core city in order to visit the main temples and to participate in the public ceremonies and the rituals. It was important for the kings to invite people over, in other words, but also at the same time, the king also wants to claim entitlements and rulership over all the different shrines and temples outside of the city core. And one way to do it, again, of a very effective way, was to build the sakbe. You know, building those roads served to kind of bring all the different parts of the kingdom together, again, to provide cohesion, so to speak, for better governing the entire area and extracting tribute as well. Okay, and also it provides, you know, a kind of the opportunity for people to develop, you know, a common sense of community, a common sense of identity within each kingdom as well. Roads are important in that regard. Now, as a whole, this is a photograph, for example, or a depiction, I should say, of the Yucatan Peninsula, just as an example of how all of the different kingdoms of the Yucatan Peninsula were also connected with each other through a system of roads. It really looks like a system of modern highways. When you look at highways, for example, in any map, you will see that virtually every city, every town, every small settlement, you know, in any country is pretty much connected through a system of highways. Again, the same holds true for the ancient Maya. They were really doing the same thing. You know, even though they were self-governed and self-ruled, there was indeed connections that took place with each other in which they were conducting interregional trade. And with trade, once again, something I've been emphasizing over and over again, with trade, commercial exchange takes place, but also cultural exchange. You diffuse, you disseminate the culture to different localities, so you're pretty much creating a homogeneous or uniform culture, you know, when you build a system of roads. You know, that is the consequence of that. Now, the sakbe was also used to carry out, as I said, warfare. There was plenty of warfare that took place during the classic era. For a long time in Maya archaeology, archaeologists believed all the way to, let us just say, the 1960s, still the prevailing idea among scholars in archaeology was that the Maya were really peaceful people, civilization that were really concerned with the cycles of time. They were great astronomers, and this was really, you know, the kind of society that they developed. That warfare perhaps played some role in the society, but it was not central. It was not something that it was important for the ancient Maya. Of course, the field of archaeology is relatively new. It started really at the end of the 19th century. That is at the end of the 1800s. Barely, again, the Maya cities were discovered. They were all covered in jungle. So we see the very first discovery of the very first Maya cities, of course. And it's really across the 20th century where the real excavation of the Maya cities took place. Again, they're discovering the cities, they're discovering the Sacbe, all the systems of roads, and we see the development, of course, of Maya archaeology. But in the 1960s, as the code, the language or the script, the writing system of the Maya was decoded, Maya archaeologists were able to now decipher what those messages were saying. In the pyramids, for example, in the stone pillars that they erected and so on, and there was plenty of information related to warfare. That warfare was carried out very often, that it was central to their society, and it was also ritualistic as well. Again, so warfare was not a secular activity. This is not really an activity that was just for the purpose of, let us just say, conquering territory and resources. Of course, that was important. But warfare also had deep religious meanings and implications as well. It was considered a religious activity. And they were often timing warfare according to the cycles of time. Again, to the passage of cycles of certain planets, for example, Venus and Mars. And whenever those planets, encounter each other in the sky or they clash in the sky, they will also initiate warfare as well. So it is very important, again, to understand that the Maya, the classic Maya, indeed engage in warfare. And of course, we see now murals in several cities in the southern Campeche region, for example. There's few archaeological sites there. In Bonampak, for example, where you will find, for example, the depictions of warriors taking captives at the end of battles, for example. So there will be a battle, and after the battle, they will capture, more often than not, they're not really capturing peasants. They're capturing nobles. In many cases, they're actually capturing priests, or they're also capturing the ruler, the king of another kingdom as well. Those were the captives, and they were taken to the other kingdom to be decapitated or to be sacrificed in many cases. Okay, so those are depictions of the Mayas themselves. You see depictions of battles, Maya warriors carrying out warfare, for example. So warfare was practiced among the Maya, and it was once again ritualistic in nature. We see also inscriptions in stone, for example, in which you see a ruler sitting here, for example, and he's receiving, of course, from maybe his commander, from a general, the information about, for example, the war. And you can see here people who are being taken captive as well, more often than not, the members of the nobility of a neighboring city, a neighboring society as well. Again, so those are carvings of the Mayas themselves that show, of course, the central importance of warfare in their civilization. All right, so now at this point, it is also very important to note or to understand also the intellectual and scientific achievements of the classic Maya. As I said a moment ago, the Maya indeed were considered really the perhaps most advanced civilizations of the Americas, period. Not only of Mesoamerica, but of the entire American continent as a whole. Again, this is going to be a society that excelled in several areas of intellectual and scientific pursuits. And they left very important contributions to the world in various regards. For example, they were the ones that actually developed a writing system, a very thorough and very well-developed writing system. Now, it is not really an alphabet. Again, so it's not like, for example, the Phoenician, for example, alphabet, or the Latin, for example, alphabet, and so on. But rather, this is a system of a pictographic, if you will, system of writing. They're called glyphs. Okay, glyphs. Those are signs or symbols that convey several words together. So those are symbols that are not just conveying an idea, okay, or a concept, for example, or a place, so to speak, but is supposed to be a little bit more sophisticated, in which each symbol really constituted, for example, an entire sentence. Okay, an entire sentence, several words string together, in other words. Okay, so it's not an alphabetic, it's not a word for word, but rather it's a system in which there are several words grouped together, and they form a sentence. And that sentence, it's really telling something that in other languages you might use 1,000 words. It's like a story condensed in a sentence, for example. And you can, in that, create an entire argument. You can create an entire story out of that, for example. Okay, so those are the symbols that have been decoded already in the 1960s and the 1970s. Those symbols were decoded by a group of archaeologists, many of whom were from the University of Texas, for example, from UT, and in assistance with other archaeologists as well in the United States. And right now, as a result of this deciphering, we're able to read and understand what the Mayas were actually writing about, during the Classic Age, because many of their murals and inscriptions in stones, for example, contain those symbols. But now archaeologists are able to just read them and understand what they're saying. Okay, this is another, again, series of symbols that also denote, once again, little stories. Those are in many cases related to mythology, related to religion, to cosmology, to their own understanding of history and the like. And the Mayas developed that. And it was uniform. So throughout the Maya area, far and wide, we see the same system of writing. So again, there is a certain uniformity across this region, that they're all using the same system of writing. Okay. Now, more often than not, those writings were used by the nobility and the monarchy, okay, the divine kings, to advertise their own sacred lineages, to legitimize their family's right to rule. Okay, in other words, more often than not, those symbols, that writing system was used to actually tell the population why the kings were the legitimate heirs to the throne and why they were divine as well. Okay, so it was really, they were used for propaganda, in other words. Okay, political propaganda, to be more precise. And the kind of political propaganda that the Maya kings formulated was the use of stone pillars. They're called stelas. Again, the Maya stelas, for example, those are actually about 16 feet tall stone pillars in which they carve the image of the ruler. Again, and along the sides, there will be certain messages inscribed, and the messages related to their date of birth, and always their date of birth was considered to be a divine timing as well. They were born during a conjunction, the planet Venus and the sun, etc. They will always bring about the sun or the planet Venus, or certain ancestors, divine ancestors that lived in the city in the distant past, to coincide with the timing of the birth of the king. Again, it was very important to tie those two events together, connecting the king with the sun god, with the planet Venus, but also with divine ancestors, for example. And they will also tell the stories of their ascension, for example, to the throne, when they ascended to the throne as well. The timing is also considered sacred. The battles, for example, important battles that they won, for example, they conquered a neighboring kingdom. They will advertise it there as well, or advertise the sacred lineage of the family. They will speak about their mother or father as, prominent figures in the past, that they built the pyramid and so on. It was advertisement, and it was also propaganda as well. The so-called stelas, and they were erected to be positioned in the main plazas, in the core cities, for people to witness, for people to see, and this served to boost the legitimacy of the ruler. Okay, so this is where most of those writings were used for. All of those symbols that I just showed you were used precisely for the kings to advertise their right to rule, their divinity in many cases. Okay, you can see other stelas again. So the Maya area is full of those stelas, those stone pillars that actually are advertisement campaigns, slogans by the rulers, to confirm and to reiterate their authority, okay, as divine kings. The Mayas also excelled in creating a mathematical system very early on. According to archaeologists, the mathematical system started being developed about 5 centuries before the birth of Christ. Again, those are the very early records that we see of a mathematical system. Of course, during the Classic Age, it was already very well developed, and it was used across the Maya world everywhere. Okay, and the mathematics was a mathematical system based on 20. They counted based on numbers of 20s as opposed to the decimal system that we use today. We count in tens. They used to count in 20s. Now, why 20? Well, there's a lot of speculation about that. Archaeologists assume that this has to do with the 20, the 10 fingers and the 10 toes altogether constitute 20, of course, of the human body. So again, that's really, an assumption. We don't know exactly why the Mayas used 20 as the base of their mathematical system. Well, they counted based on 20s. And the way they inscribed the numbers was by using dots and bars. Okay, you can see here. And by the way, this is very important, that the Mayas are considered today on record to have invented the concept of the zero way before any other culture did. So there's a lot of competition right now, which culture developed the zero first, whether it was in India, for example, whether it was the Arabs or the Persians. Again, there's a lot of controversy as to who really invented the concept of the zero. But the Mayas show that about 5 centuries before the birth of Christ, there's already, records that show that they invented the zero, even before the other civilizations appear to have invented the zero. Okay, so that's another very important contribution. And again, it's mind-boggling. What is zero? Okay, we can understand what is 1 and 2 and 3 and so on, all the way to infinity. But zero contains no value whatsoever. But nonetheless, the Mayas came up with it and used it in their mathematical computations, as you can see here. Okay, so very, very important contribution. And of course, the main reason why the Mayas invented mathematics was to create a calendar system. That's another contribution, another intellectual contribution of the ancient Maya, was the calendars. Okay, charting the natural cycles. They were observers of nature. They really were aware that everything went in cycles, that the cycles of time were really the celestial bodies circling around the sky every single day. And as such, they spent a lot of time, particularly the astronomer priests, a lot of time observing nature and trying to chart the different cycles of time. And they created different kinds of calendars. For example, we see the Olmec 260-day sacred calendar being adopted by the Maya. It's called the Tzolk'in. The Tzolk'in, again, is a 260-day calendar that was used for rituals, for ending cycles, for beginning cycles, and it was considered to be the base of all the other calendars that they crafted. For example, the other calendar that they crafted was called the Tun. The Tun calendar was a 360-day solar year. Now, we understand that the year has 365 plus days, of course, but somehow the Mayas introduced a calendar that we're still not sure why. They only gave it 360 days. According to some schools of archaeology and astronomy, this has to do with the 360 degree of the Earth. Okay, the Earth's circumference, for example. So that is really one of the schools of of thought in archaeology about what this calendar means, what it actually marks, in other words, what it's actually measuring. The other one is called the Hab, and this is more of a civil, secular calendar that deals with the agricultural year, and this is yet again the 365 days agricultural year. And this was used to time the planting cycle, the harvesting cycle, and the like. Again, all of those activities were timed according to the so-called Hab. Now, another very important calendar that the governors, the rulers, the kings and the priests that administer those kingdoms used to govern is called the Katun Round. And this is a very, very fascinating calendar that consists of 13 cycles. Each cycle is 20 years in length. So as a whole, the entire cycle is 260 years. Okay? 260 years. So let me just write it right here. 13 cycles of 20 years. 260 years. Okay? 13 cycles of 20 years each. Now, what actually is the Katun Round, 260 years? What the cycles is? Well, according to astronomers and archaeologists that have studied this calendar, it appears that this calendar actually charted the cycles of the eclipses. Okay, all of the eclipses, again, that take place are influenced by different planets. Okay, so every 20 years, all of the eclipses are actually influenced by one or more planets of the solar system. And the Mayas realized that there were certain cycles in which the eclipses were neutral. They didn't really cause a lot of problems in the Earth. And in other cycles, the eclipses were very, very harmful. They will bring, for example, droughts. They will bring warfare. They will bring plagues and so on. And they noted that, that in certain cycles, the eclipses were very harmful, very damaging. They will bring a lot of calamities. In other cycles, we see neutral conditions. In other cycles, very beneficial conditions. So they created a cycle in which it actually tells you which 20-year cycle is going to be beneficial for agriculture, when there's going to be war, when there's going to be a plague, etc. So they were, with using this knowledge, they were able to predict way in advance which cycles were going to affect the city. So in many cases, they will tell the people that they needed to abandon the city because they will say, there's a 20-year cycle of drought, so there will be no rain. So we have to move out of the city and look for water elsewhere. Move to a lake, move to a river, etc. We have to move out of the city. And after that cycle ended, they will return and reoccupy the city. So the Mayas were very well known for migrating in and out of cities, abandoning the city in certain cycles of time and actually returning in other cycles of time as well. Okay? All right. So there's another calendar. It's called the long count calendar, which is a very long count. Again, it's a large cycle of time made up of 13 cycles. Each cycle is made up of 400 years of 360 days each. 400 tune years, in other words. So this is a long, long count. We don't know exactly what it measures, but we're talking about over 5,000 years. And according to this long count calendar, the beginning of that calendar started about 3114 BC, 3114 BC, and it ended in the year 2012 AD. So we don't know exactly, again, what that cycle of time, which is a long, long, cycle of time, what actually it marks. Does it mark a world age, an era? What is it? We don't have no idea. Again, but this was something that received a lot of attention, a lot of popularity in the past. The 2012, end of the Mayan calendar. Again, nothing happened, of course, but this was part of this so-called long count calendar that the Mayas left as well in their inscriptions. And the other calendar dealt with the cycles of Venus, the Venus calendar. Now, why they follow the Venus calendar? According to archaeologists, they follow it because Venus also had an influence on the world in terms of not only agriculture, but also in the ending of certain cycles related to cities, the construction of temples, but also, and most importantly, for the birth of certain divine beings or divine figures that were important in Maya religion. Okay? All right, so now, their construction, Maya construction, also was important in that they built their civilization based on the sky. Astronomy and engineering were part of the same system of thought. And all of their cities, temples, and homes were aligned in an east and west axis. East and west axis, in other words, this always the entrance is from the east where the sun rises, and the other entrance is from the west as well. That was the flow of energy in which they build all of their pyramids, their cities, their temples, including their homes as well. Again, you can see here the alignment of their pyramids according to the passage of the sun was important, to the point that every pyramid was really a calendar made up of stone or rock. Again, for example, the pyramid of Chichen Itza in the Yucatan, you can see that the beginning of the spring equinox, March 21st, you can see that the angles of the pyramids form a light shadow spectacle of a serpent descending from the sky. Again, from 1 p.m. it starts descending, and by 3:30 p.m. it joins the snake, again the head of the snake made of rock at the bottom of the pyramid. So it makes actually the spectacle of a serpent made of light, the sunlight, in other words. Okay, this is another angle of that light show spectacle. And again, how to actually build the pyramid in that way so you can actually have that kind of phenomena. Again, it's really very intricate, sophisticated mathematics and engineering, and also astronomy, of course. So they were excellent astronomers as well. In another city in the Yucatan, you can see that in the main temple, you see the sun rises exactly in the very middle of the temple. Again, in the beginning of the spring as well, the beginning of the planting cycle as well. Okay, this is another, photograph of that temple. The sun rises from the east at the very, very center of the temple, you can see here. Again, so those are solar alignments. Now, the Maya religious worldview is very important to look at. Again, how the Mayas looked at the world around them. We know about the world that the Mayas conceived based on the archaeological record, also from certain writings of the colonial period, the Popol Vuh, which is considered the Maya Bible for a lot of peoples in Guatemala, and also the writings in Yucatan, the Chilambalam manuscripts. From those, we can actually reconstruct their religious worldview, in which they conceive reality made up of three different cosmic spheres: the heavens, the upper world, the world of nature, the middle world, and also the underworld. Again, so there are three levels of reality in the universe, three cosmic spheres. This is how the Maya actually conceived of of the universe. So therefore, each world is inhabited by different spirits. The celestial spirits, the creator God, the sun, the moon, the planets, and the stars, are inhabiting the heavens, the upper world. In the world of nature, the world of humans, there are nature spirits. Okay, the spirits of nature. Those are the gods, the goddesses that live inside of nature. And in the underworld, we have the ancestor spirits. Okay, the spirits of the dead. You know, every person that dies goes to the underworld. This is where they live, in other words. Okay. Now, in terms of the middle world of nature, their religious worldview is called pantheism, meaning that they believe that the gods, the goddesses that created the world, live in nature. They don't live outside of nature. They're very much present in nature. Okay, so that's called pantheism. That's God in nature. And so those are the gods of the environment, and they are also the gods of agriculture as well. The main gods of the Mayas, again, are the gods of the environment and agriculture. For example, the four elements. And the four elements were always symbolized by a sacred cross. You can see here in some of the inscriptions, one of the Maya cities, again, the cross was present everywhere because the four elements are the base of nature. You know, fire, water, earth, and wind. They're in the four corners of the universe. They're always symbolized by the sacred cross. Again, so they're very, very important gods of the agriculturalist. The rain god, Chak, was also a major god, is inscribed in almost every city across the Maya world. You know, this is the mask or the face of Chak, the rain god. Again, those are agricultural deities, agricultural gods. The god of wilderness, vegetation, and corn is also, again, one of the major gods of the peasantry and also of all of the cities. Regardless whether the peasants or the nobility worship them, they're worshipped virtually by everybody. Again, this is, again, the representation of the god of the wilderness. Also, there's a number of different earth spirits. They're called Alush. The equivalent in Europe will be the leprechaun, the goblin, for example. Those are the guardian spirits of nature. They're all depicted as little people, little beings, again, that live in nature. They're the guardians of places. They're the guardians of the cornfields and the like. And they must be nourished. It's very important that they must be nourished through ritual. So we see the development of three main religious cults, therefore, in this religious worldview. The most important one was the agrarian cult. In the agrarian cult, the idea is to commune with the gods of nature to bring about change in the environment. So this is a religious-based technology. You're trying to bring about change in the environment by communicating with the forces that govern the environment. Again, so all of the ceremonies of the peasantry, the agricultural ceremonies of the peasantry devoted to agriculture, were intended to bring about a change in the environment in favor of agriculture. Rainmaking was one of them. One of the most important rituals was rainmaking, making rain, in other words, and also fertility, fertilization, offering, conferring offerings to the earth spirits, to the god of wilderness, the god of the wilderness, and so on, the rain god, for example, in order to fertilize the ground again. So the agrarian cult was really at the base of Maya religious cosmology. The ancestor cult, this is the worshiping of deceased family members, and this was really the main religious tradition and religious cult of the royalty, again, of the royal family and the kings, for example, to claim land and to claim power. You can see very clearly in the inscriptions of all of the cities, the kings performing ancestor worship in order to legitimize their power. Again, ancestors legitimize royal power. And you can see here, for example, this king right here invoking the ancestor, and the ancestor is appearing in smoke before the ruler in order to grant a message, in order to grant a blessing or a vision to the ruler. And those were advertised, for the people to see, saying, look, we descend from the ancestors, we can connect with the ancestors, and the ancestors are giving us the power to rule, for example. Again, so this is very important that almost all of the Maya rulers appear to be invoking the ancestors. This is another Maya ruler invoking the ancestor, and the ancestor is appearing from the ethers, if you will, to appear before the ruler in order to grant some form of blessing as well, or vision to the ruler. Again, so this is very, very, very common in the Maya area. Now, there's another cult. It's called the astronomical cult. And again, this is the worship of celestial bodies or celestial deities. Time is considered a sacred entity. It is really the phenomenon produced by the celestial deities, particularly the sun god. So there is sun worship taking place. And this is, again, a cult that the astronomer priest, known as the Akin. The Akin, were the astronomer priests, were the ones actually worshiping the sun. He is the one governing time, and we must worship him because he's the one governing all the activities here on earth, human activities in agriculture, fertility, and the like. Again, so there's a sun cult, and this is the sun god. Again, this is really an inscription, again, of the sun god that was worshipped everywhere in the Maya area. Also, the planet Venus is being observed and is being worshipped. There is an observatory, for example, in the city of Chichen Itza that I showed you in Yucatan. And this is an observatory for the planet Venus. There's a temple of Venus. And it seems that Venus also had certain veneration among the higher priests as well. Again, because it was connected, once again, with royalty as well, with divine kings. All right, so this last part 3, is going to really quickly look at the post-classic period, what happened after, again, the classic era of Mesoamerican civilizations, particularly among the Maya. And it spanned from 900 to 1521 AD. It's called the post-classic period. In 900 AD, despite the fact that we see intensive construction work, pyramid building, art forms, and artistic creations across the Maya world, suddenly by the year 900 AD, Maya civilization collapsed. What is the reason for that? Well, there's various theories. Militarism and endemic warfare is one of the reasons. There's a lot of war, in other words, taking place. Overpopulation and environmental degradation, deforestation. They upset the ecological balance, and that led to prolonged periods of drought, perhaps, the inability for the soil to produce crops. And again, this really sets off a crisis in the Maya area. Climate change. We see prolonged droughts as well. One of the reasons for that, besides deforestation, has to do with volcanic eruptions in the area that really made agriculture impossible. There's signs of seasonal starvation among the Maya, and with that, of course, the massive abandonment of cities. The Mayas are abandoning cities en masse by 900 AD, and with that comes the end of the divine institution of kingship as well. Kings are unable to deal with the crises, and as people are abandoning the cities, they lose their legitimacy, they lose their power. In the post-classic Maya world, what we see is that all the cities are abandoned except a handful in the Yucatan Peninsula. The Yucatan Peninsula continues holding some form of urban activity, but now there's waves and waves of migrations, particularly from central Mexico. There are Toltec migrations to the Yucatan. There is a priest that arrives to the Yucatan. His name is Topintzin Quetzalcoatl. He's from central Mexico. He arrives with a group of warriors, with a group of priests, and with that, of course, we see a blending of cultures, a culture that is going to be Maya, but with some Toltec attributes as well. Okay, so again, so we see during this time, again, a Toltec influence again in the Maya area, Toltec influence. Now, what's very, very important to note is that from 1283 to 1440 AD, we see 3 major cities, the only remaining cities of the Maya world, forming a confederation. It's called the League of Mayapan. That is, the city of Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and Mayapan are going to come together and form a united alliance, a united front, so to speak, to continue Maya civilization in this region. While the other cities were abandoned, we see the continuation of Maya civilization during this period of time. And what really glued them together was the worshiping of Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl. Again, the Kukulkan cult becomes the national cult during this time, and that provided, of course, a common sense of community and identity during this time. Again, this is the region, again, where the League of Mayapan used to, continue, but by the 1450s, that league dissolved, disintegrated, and even those cities were abandoned. So again, Maya civilization did not really continued after that. People now went to live in villages, in small communities, away from the cities. The cities were totally abandoned. So what we have learned in this topic, the summary points so far, what we have covered is the Olmecs. For example, the Olmecs were the initiators of civilization. They were the ones that started building pyramids, the ball courts, and the ancestor worship, burial traditions as well. Teotihuacan in the Central Valley of Mexico adopted the Olmec ideas, but expanded those ideas even further across Mesoamerica. They were the forerunners of urban infrastructure. They built a cosmopolitan society, very diverse, and also ceremonial centers. And once again, they expanded the culture far and wide across Mesoamerica. The Maya, they were the intellectual peak of Mesoamerica. Writing systems, mathematics, calendars, astronomy engineering, for example, were one of the major developments of the ancient Maya. And of course, after 900 AD, with the collapse of Maya civilization, we see a lost civilization. That despite the fact that they, had an age of splendor, a golden age of civilization, that civilization collapsed, and then the jungle pretty much took over and covered their entire cities with jungle and foliage and vegetation. They were lost in time, only to be rediscovered in the late 1800s again. So we're still in the process of learning more about the Olmec, Teotihuacan, and the Maya as a whole. Okay, so this is all I have for you. We have reached the end of this topic. When we come back, we're going to start another topic. We're going to be moving now to Europe, looking at the Greeks and the Romans. This is the 7th topic coming next. This is all I have for you. Thank you.